want to stand here? You're good. Okay, I got you.
All right, there we go.
Captain Fitzgerald, and without further ado, please give a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you very much for being here. I think the introduction might be longer than the talk. It was going to be at first a Q&A and then a talk, and then I heard later a speech, and I started getting more worried to walk around the block. But anyway, I have a few vignettes I'd like to share just briefly that might inform a bit about the work and what I've been trying to do most of my life. But the idea, the name of the show, The Stillness of Time, is sort of a funny play on words. You know, stillness. You know, we're still here. I'm still. What's, you know, be still. So it's a word. The words are funny. Words don't get you everywhere you need to go. And imagery and inanimate objects sometimes do take you places that words can't. You know, words are. It's a symbol language that tries to describe emotion in us, and it does. It's the only thing we have to work with, but it's the best thing we have to work with for a common denominator. But the visual and the music, sounds of music, these kinds of things are older than say words exactly. So the stillness of time, time itself is a question mark. I think of Augustine, first or second century to third century Roman in Hippo in North Africa, a Roman province. But this is the height of the empire. And Augustine was a great pivotal figure, and he said many funny things, as well as all the religious foundations he laid. They said, like, time. I know what time is until you ask me to put it into words. And he talked about the past and the present being always here, the present, the future never here. The past was, but it's the present is like an eternity. So time for Augustine was something, for the first time in intellectual history, someone thought about time as something outside of just using it as a part of the language. Like, well, what time is it? Or I'm going to be here next time, or the seasons, like in Ecclesiastes, a time for this, a time for that. But this is the first person that brought it out and thought, what is the nature of time itself? And we still don't quite know, do we? So we're working on that. So the inanimate objects, sometimes they exist like we exist, and we're temporal people. We are passing through. But it informed me. When I was a kid, I went to the National Gallery of Art, and I saw people smiling at paintings and looking at things, and realized that moment that those people are just passing by. But that Rembrandt painting has been talking to people for 500 years or 400 years, and that's so that inanimate object is existing. It shares existence with us, the animate, but that it somehow may be on a different plane of experience. And it certainly slowed time. It slowed time down. People stop and look. So I thought maybe I would try to, you know, get that in my work if I was going to be a painter. I was thinking about that at the time. So I brought a pet rock with me. This is when I was a kid. I found this rock, and I think you can probably see a face in it. And it provoked me, you know, to think, you know, I don't know why, but I knew it was a very old rock, millions of years probably. There's a shell fossil in there, which is the eye, and I just never can get over it, you know. So it's like an inanimate object, but whenever I look at this, I smile or I think, wow, you know, time just goes away, whatever time is, and I'm back to that point when I picked it up off the ground somewhere. So that teases me out of all thought, as doth eternity, which John Keats said. Now, John Keats, this was another vignette, he happened to be in England about 200 years ago and was helping to give birth to the Romantic movement, which is the idea that we don't know everything anymore. We're not so certain. And the joke is, I'm usually right, but I'm always certain, you know. You know, we hear that in politics, you know, people are certain about their certainty, but they're not necessarily always right. But anyway, Keats was lucky enough that he knew this group of people, Wordsworth and Shelley and Byron, and Lord Elgin. Now, I was an art history teacher. I used to always say Elgin, the Elgin marbles. I always mispronounced it. And about a year ago, I looked it up, and it's Elgin. So anyway, the Elgin marbles were saved by Lord Elgin in the 1700s. There was Turkey and Greece were beating each other to death for whatever apparent reason, who knows. But the Parthenon was still in perfect repair at the time. It had survived for 2,000 years because it was so perfectly beautiful. And these stone sculptures, and people will go and say, oh my God, look at that. Look at these marbles, these people, these giant gods and goddesses. And they were perfectly wrought and beautifully wrought by Phidias and Praxiteles and these guys. And they were a compass point for humanity. But the Greeks and the Turks were having a war, and they were blowing up. They stored powder in the Parthenon, and many of you know the history, and a mortar shot hit it and blew the roof off it and tore it all to pieces. But it exists as a ruin, but the frieze was still there. These figures were up in there. So Lord Elgin, now he's a criminal, because he went and culturally appropriated these marbles, but really he saved them. Excuse me. And he brought them back to England. And one of his buddies is John Keats, this great poet. And this funny little side story I recently came across is that he stored the marbles in a little greenhouse on his estate and let Keats come in there. And so John Keats would go in to this greenhouse filled with all this Greek statuary that no one had ever seen, and was by himself. So he stood still before it. At the time, Keats was just having a moment. I can only imagine what came of that. And of course, Keats was to die at 26 years old, but he was one of these incandescent geniuses of poetry. And he wrote the Ode on the Grecian Urn and talked about his experience. Really, he was talking about that. He said there's a little vase here, and he saw little pictures of Greeks doing certain things. There's a little empty city, and there's somebody about to kiss somebody, and he looked at that, but he was talking about the Elgin marbles. And because it moved him so much to be in the presence of these stones, basically, which were never going to change. He realized that. And he knew he was. So anyway, he, lines in that poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn, it's the idea that, the idea again, first time that the inanimate object exists with us on an equal ground at least, maybe superior, because we're just passing through. We don't know what's going to happen. But so time, time writes no wrinkles on thine azure brow, since as dawn's creation beheld thee, thou rollest now. Now that's a romantic poet, Byron, talking about the ocean. Time writes no wrinkles on thine azure brow, the blueness of the ocean. Since as dawn's creation beheld thee, thou rollest now. It's always going to be, it's like the respiration of the planet. And then Keats wrote, after spending days in contemplation with these marbles, he wrote, what did he write? Bold lover looking for your kiss. There's this picture of this guy reaching for the kiss of the fair maiden, and he can't quite reach it because it's trapped in an image. And so it's never going to happen. He's never going to get it. And they're never going to find their love. But he says, fear not, forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. So it just kills you, the way that he could see, the permanence of that, even though it didn't actually happen. It was at the moment of potentiality, So in paintings, I'm trying to keep those kinds of things in mind. I try to think of something that would be an interlocking inevitability of color, that somehow shapes that seem like they have to be that way, and the color has to be that way, and it remind us emotionally of states that we have that come to us in dreams. So I'm not trying to make anything that's too particular. As they say, as you gain the particular, you lose the infinite. So that's why poetry is so cool, because you can read a book and there's all this crap in a book, all this da-da-da-da-da-da, and she did this, he did that. But in a poem, you've got to really use the language and just pare everything away. And just this essence comes through. So at the end of Keats' poem is, one old age this generation shall wait, shall waste. Thou shalt remain in midst of other woe, a friend to man, who shall proclaim beauty, truth, truth is beauty. That's all you know on earth and all you need to know. So this is coming from a 26-year-old genius, and he quickly died after that. But that's the kind of movement that happened because he was made to stand still. So time, to me, I've discovered later in life, is that if I don't do anything all day long, time goes by so nice and slow. When I start moving through space and start doing things, time just goes away. It just goes away. So to be still before something, it says that in the Bible, be still and know that I'm the Lord. But to be still by the still waters. Stillness is an important visual concept for us to entertain, to keep us healthier, I think, rather than to be so turbulent, So I could go different directions with it, but when I was 10 years old, about the time I found this rock, I built a stone wall in the woods with some friends of mine in the woods in D.C., which is a beautiful park, Fort DuPont Park, Fort Davis Park, and it's exactly the same as it was. This is 55 years ago. But the park is not going to be touched because it's just, it's preserved. It was an old Civil War fort, but it's maybe 2 square miles of real estate right in southeast Washington. And I went in there and with some friends, with one friend in particular, Donald Freeman, and we built a stone wall about 20 or 30 feet long, worked really hard on it for 2 or 3 days. I don't know why. We were building a defense or something, they were going to get us and we were going to play guns or whatever. And I built this stone wall. And, and then we left and we moved, but I've forgotten about it. But every once in a while I remember, I built that wall back there. And my brother and I, about 2 years ago, went back to D.C. with bicycles on our cars and decided we would ride around the neighborhood like we were kids and the neighborhood's the same. And we went out into the woods and you could see places where 3 forts had been built, but there used to be like rusty nails and things. Everything's gone like that. That's all. Time has taken care of that. Life has. But the stone wall we came across, and it's right there, exactly. It just blew me away. I tell you, I was choked up. I mean, it was like my parents called me in to get a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or something. And 55 years later, I came back out to the stone wall. And my brother and I were just freaking out. It was just really cool. But that time was still there at that place. And it's still there. And I don't think it'll be wrecked. But anyway, I'm trying to get those kinds of feelings to happen in a visual arrangement. And that's the idea about what I'm trying to do. This painting is Inlet Dawn, and I'm trying to put across the idea of hope or possibility, trying to show the feeling of it's been very dark, but then there's these really nice colors that present themselves at some point in dawn or the evening. So I'm interested in that time of the day because it's like maximizes possibility. Something's about to happen. The beginning of the day or the end of the day. In this painting, I'm trying to show like the heat and the glare of an ocean day, sort of an evanescence or sort of an atmosphere starting to just emerge, like a cloud just emerges and catches the light in the scene, like a lampshade does. It somehow does that. It reflects back up and down, and there's this sort of special effect that the natural world presents itself to us. And you forget once again that it might be an ocean or anything. It's just that there's these various visual phenomena happening and taking place. And that's what I'm trying to get across there. This is Mount Vernon Fields, this painting. And it reminds me, I grew up in Alexandria in D.C. area, and Mount Vernon's a beautiful place to visit, but along the way down the Mount Vernon Parkway, you get these glimpses of the Potomac River. And it's completely separate from any of the historical aspects, but it's just simply a beautiful landscape. And there's these flat lands that you can see the river peeking through. And I just think it's, sort of very, it's a very, what's the word, provocative sort of visual arrangement that makes you think of something much longer than the here and now. You see this ancient, it's like an ancient river. And it's been there. The East Coast rivers are very old, like the Appalachian Mountains and the Blue Ridge Mountains. They're some of the oldest features on Earth. And I think that it's really cool to see that right here where so much history happened. So I've returned to this theme many times. And Mount Vernon is a resident thing. We all know what Mount Vernon is, but just to see it as the landscape and forget about the history. Just the landscape is what the eternal aspect would be, rather than, the fact that a country was founded here, which is also very nice. But this is also a painting that is on one of the invitation pieces or used for advertising, and it's an image that I'm particularly drawn to. It reminds me of an old Western show. I was actually watching Shane on television and saw the scene when he rides into town for the showdown, and this was reminiscent of that to me. So, and then there's a suggestion of a path going into a deep space. So I like the evocation of that, of the possibility once again, but there's something portentous, not pretentious, but portentous, hopefully, about to happen. This painting, Horizon Dawn, is again trying to illustrate or trying to bring forth the idea of something's about to happen, and whether it's a dawn or an evening, not so sure, but I did call it dawn. It's hopeful. Red sky at dawn, that kind of thing. But I just want the idea of almost forgetting the fact that it's a landscape, but just that these are color marks, and these are things that resonate in the viewer, rather than they being any particular place. identification pieces for the show, and it's a new series I'm trying to work on where you're thinking about, iconic memories, maybe like a walk in the woods towards the water in the distance.